We hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Thomas Wheeler's calloused hands moved with practiced precision across the engine of Mrs. Davis's 1967 Mustang. The rich scent of motor oil and metal filled the air of Anderson's auto shop as he tightened the final bolt. At 32, he developed an almost supernatural ability to diagnose automotive ailments that left other mechanics scratching their heads. "She's purring like a kitten now, Mrs. Davis," Thomas said, wiping his hands on his blue work uniform. The elderly woman's face lit up as the engine hummed smoothly. "Thomas, you're a miracle worker. Every other shop said it was hopeless." Mrs. Davis reached into her purse. "Let me give you something extra." "The regular rate is fine, ma'am." Thomas held up his hand. "Just keep bringing her in for regular maintenance." Mike Anderson, the shop owner, watched from his office. He'd hired Thomas straight out of technical school 12 years ago and never regretted it. The kid had an integrity you couldn't teach. "You know, Wheeler," Mike said later as they locked up, "I'm thinking of retiring in a few years. Shop could be yours if you're interested. Lord knows you practically run it already." Thomas's eyes widened slightly. That's a generous offer, Mike. I need to discuss it with Amanda." The mention of his wife brought a slight tension to his shoulders. Amanda Wheeler was everything Thomas wasn't. Vivacious, artistic, always chasing the next big dream. He'd fallen for her in high school, the shy mechanic and the drama club star. Their differences had seemed romantic then. Thomas drove his pickup truck home, mind churning over Mike's offer. The modest ranch house came into view, the one he'd spent 2 years renovating himself. Every nail, every board held his sweat and dedication. The garage door was open, revealing Amanda's red Volkswagen Beetle, another of his restoration projects. Inside, Amanda was pacing the kitchen, her dark hair wild around her face as she gestured animatedly into her phone. No, the lighting has to be perfect. We're doing Death of a Salesman, not some high school musical." Thomas waited quietly by the doorway, noting the untouched groceries on the counter. The chicken he'd asked her to defrost for dinner was still frozen solid. "Oh, Thomas." Amanda jumped, ending her call. "I didn't hear you come in." "You won't believe it. The Community Theater Board approved my summer production. Full creative control." "That's great, honey." Thomas moved to the freezer, pulling out a frozen pizza instead. "Mike offered me the shop today." "Oh, that's nice." Amanda was already texting again. "Listen, I need to run to the theater. Emergency production meeting. Don't wait up." She kissed his cheek absently, leaving a smear of her signature red lipstick. Thomas watched her rush out, heels clicking against the tiles he'd laid himself. The house felt suddenly larger, emptier. That night, Thomas sat at their small kitchen table, reviewing their finances. Amanda's theater dreams weren't cheap, but he'd always supported them. Extra shifts, weekend work, careful budgeting. They had almost enough saved for her dream of opening an acting school for kids. The front door opened well past midnight. Amanda breezed in, smelling of wine and cigarettes. She'd quit smoking years ago, or so she claimed. The meeting went amazing. She twirled, dropping her designer purse on the counter. "I found the perfect lead for Willie Loman, Nathan Russell, the new music teacher at the high school." You just get to Thomas. The vision, the artistry. Thomas looked up from his papers. "Nathan Russell? Isn't he divorced?" "Recently, yes. He's quite brilliant, actually. Oxford educated, taught at some prestigious schools back east." Amanda's eyes sparkled with admiration. "He's exactly what this production needs. The budget sheets need your signature," Thomas said quietly. "For the acting school loan?" "All right. Tomorrow?" "I'm exhausted." Amanda yawned theatrically. "Nathan and I lost track of time discussing character motivations. He has such fascinating insights into the human condition." Thomas watched her disappear upstairs, leaving her wine-stained glass in the sink. He washed it carefully, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet where it belonged. Everything in its proper place. That's how he'd always lived his life. The next morning, Thomas arrived early at the shop. Working on engines cleared his mind, gave him control in a world that increasingly felt like it was slipping away. Around noon, he decided to surprise Amanda with lunch at the theater. The parking lot was empty, except for a sleek BMW he didn't recognize. Inside, The theater was dark and silent. On the stage, scattered sheet music surrounded the piano, but no one was there. Amanda's script lay open on a seat, annotated in unfamiliar masculine handwriting. Looking for someone? Thomas turned to find Rosa, Amanda's sister, holding a bakery box. She worked at the Italian pastry shop their parents had started before opening their restaurant. Brought Amanda's favorite cannoli, Rosa said, her expression careful. But I guess she's not here. Production meeting, probably, Thomas replied. Rosa shifted uncomfortably. Thomas, I saw her yesterday, at the Bluebird Cafe in Millbrook, with some man. They looked close. Thomas's hands clenched briefly, then relaxed. Nathan Russell, her lead actor. They're working on the play. The play, right? Rosa touched his arm gently. Just keep your eyes open, okay? Family looks out for family. That evening, Amanda was bubbling with excitement over dinner. Takeout again, despite the fresh groceries in the fridge. Nathan's bringing such depth to the role. Did you know he lived in London for 5 years? The stories he tells. She pushed her food around her plate. Oh, and I'm going to a theater conference in Boston next weekend. 3 days of workshops and networking. Thomas cut his chicken. Boston? That's new. Last-minute opportunity. Nathan suggested it. He's presented there before. This could really help with the acting school plans. I thought we agreed to discuss major expenses first. Thomas's voice remained level. The conference fee, hotel. Amanda waved dismissively. Nathan knows the organizers. Got me a discount, and I'll share a room with another attendee to save money. Later, Thomas stood in their bedroom, watching Amanda pack. New clothes with tags still attached spilled from shopping bags. A receipt from an upscale salon lay crumpled in the trash. The conference materials were surprisingly sparse. I should go, Amanda said, checking her phone for the 10th time in as many minutes. Early start tomorrow. Thomas nodded, picking up his work jacket. Night shift at the shop. Big restoration project. He kissed her goodbye, tasting unfamiliar lipstick, darker, more expensive than her usual brand. Amanda barely seemed to notice him leave. Instead of driving to the shop, Thomas parked near Mrs. Henderson's house. The elderly widow had been his surrogate grandmother since losing his parents in a car crash at 16. She'd attended his graduation when no one else would, helped him apply for technical school scholarships. Mrs. Henderson opened her door before he could knock. Her wise eyes took in his expression, the tension in his jaw. How long have you known? She asked softly. Known? Or suspected? Thomas's voice was raw. The cameras arrive tomorrow. I need somewhere to monitor them from. Mrs. Henderson pressed her spare key into his palm. The guest room is yours. Sometimes seeing the truth hurts less than wondering. Thomas gripped the key until its edges bit into his flesh. In the morning, he would begin dismantling the lies. For now, he sat in Mrs. Henderson's kitchen, accepting a cup of chamomile tea, preparing himself for the pain to come. Every betrayal would be documented, every deception exposed. Thomas Wheeler had built his life on honesty and hard work. Anyone who threatened that would learn just how unforgiving he could be. Mrs. Henderson watched him from her rocking chair, remembering another night 40 years ago when she discovered her own husband's infidelity. Channel your pain into purpose, she advised quietly. And remember, you've got family here. Not all blood ties are true ties. Thomas nodded, his expression hardening into granite. Amanda had chosen her path, preferring pretty lies to solid truth. Soon she would learn that some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired, and some men, once betrayed, couldn't be deceived again. Rosa Romano wiped flour from her hands, watching the morning crowd at her family's bakery. The bell above the door chimed as her sister Amanda swept in, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the early hour. Just picking up the usual for rehearsal, Amanda announced, barely glancing at the display cases she used to spend hours drooling over as a child. Funny, Rosa said, boxing the Italian cookies their mother had taught them to make. Theater's been closed all morning. Papa drove past twice. Amanda's perfectly manicured fingers drummed the counter. We're meeting off-site. Nathan found this charming cafe in Millbrook, 2 towns over. I saw you there yesterday. Rosa's dark eyes, so like their mother's, fixed on her sister. Looked cozy. It's called production planning, Rosa. Amanda's voice carried a warning edge. Not that you'd understand artistic collaboration. No. I collaborate with Mama and Papa every day. Running the business they built from nothing while you chase spotlight dreams. Rosa pushed the box across the counter. No charge. Family discount. Amanda's phone buzzed. Her face softened as she checked the message, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. Without another word to her sister, she hurried out, leaving the cookies behind. Rosa picked up the phone to call Thomas, then set it down. Blood ties ran deep in Italian families, but so did truth. She'd give her sister one more chance to make things right. Across town, Thomas was elbow-deep in a transmission repair when his phone lit up with a text from Amanda, working late again. Don't wait up! Red Art. Mike Anderson watched his best mechanic's face darken briefly before returning to its usual stoic expression. Wheeler, Mike called out. Got a minute? In Mike's office, surrounded by decades of automotive memorabilia, Thomas stood with the patience of a man used to carrying heavy burdens. Known you since you were a kid, Mike began. Watched you rebuild yourself after losing your folks. You're the son I never had. He paused. Which is why I'm asking. Everything okay at home? Thomas's hands, strong enough to bend metal, remained perfectly still. Amanda's busy with the theater production. Yeah, seen her car there late nights. And that fancy BMW too. Mike's voice carried decades of fatherly concern. Sometimes the strongest men are the last to admit when something's wrong. I handle my problems, Mike. Always have. Like you handled that drunk driver who killed your parents? Channeled that rage into rebuilding engines instead of destroying yourself. Mike stood, putting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Just remember, you've got family here too. Blood ain't always thicker than motor oil. That afternoon, Thomas visited the high school under the pretense of checking their auto shop equipment. The hallways echoed with summer emptiness as he made his way to the music room. Nathan Russell's classroom walls displayed Broadway posters and pretentious quotes about artistic suffering. A framed Oxford diploma hung prominently. Thomas made a mental note to verify its authenticity. Can I help you? Thomas turned to find a petite woman in practical clothing, a stark contrast to Amanda's theatrical fashion choices. Maintenance check, he said, holding up his toolbox. You're not Nathan Russell. Thank God for small mercies. Her laugh held bitter edges. I'm Sarah Chun, Science Department. Nathan's probably at the theater, making dramatic declarations about his artistic integrity. You don't sound impressed. Sarah glanced down the empty hallway. Let's just say, I've seen this play before. The charming artist sweeps in, dazzles everyone with cultured sophistication, especially the lonely or ambitious women. Then the masks start slipping. Thomas's expression remained neutral, but his mind cataloged every word. Sounds like you've got front row seats to quite a show. More like backstage pass to the tragedy. Sarah gathered her papers. Did you know he tried to convince the board to fund a European choir tour? Right after his divorce, when he was suddenly very interested in cultural exchanges with wealthy donors. Thomas left the school with a growing list of contacts to investigate. Nathan Russell's carefully curated image would require dismantling, like stripping down an engine to find the faulty parts. Evening found him parked near the theater, watching Amanda's car sit empty in the lot. The BMW was gone, but a receipt blown against the Volkswagen's tire revealed dinner charges from Villa Romano, the expensive Italian restaurant where Thomas had proposed. Inside their house, Thomas moved through rooms he'd rebuilt himself, cataloging changes. Amanda's new clothes, far beyond their budget. Credit card statements showing hotel charges in neighboring towns. The calendar on her phone synced to their shared account, filled with increasingly frequent production meetings. The bedroom still smelled of her new perfume. French, expensive, selected to impress sophisticated tastes. Thomas opened her jewelry box, finding spaces where familiar pieces should be. The simple pearl necklace he'd given her for their first anniversary was missing. Their wedding album sat on the shelf, thick with memories. Thomas flipped through pages of smiles and promises, remembering how Amanda had insisted on writing their own vows. He'd spent weeks crafting his, meaning every word about honesty, loyalty, and lifelong dedication. The sound of Amanda's car pulling in snapped the album shut. Thomas quickly moved to his workshop in the garage, surrounded by the tools and machines that never lied, never betrayed their purpose. Thomas? Amanda's voice carried artificial brightness. You won't believe what happened at rehearsal. Nathan had this brilliant idea for the staging. Dinner's in the fridge, he called back, not trusting himself to face her yet. Made your favorite lasagna. Oh, I already ate. Production meeting ran late. You know how artists are about time. Thomas gripped his wrench tighter, remembering the restaurant receipt. At Villa Romano? A pause. What? No, just grabbed a sandwich. Amanda's laugh held a nervous tremor. Hey, I'm exhausted. Gonna take a bath and head to bed. Don't stay up too late. Later, Thomas stood in their dark kitchen, studying the untouched lasagna. He'd followed his mother's recipe exactly, the one Amanda used to beg him to make. Now it sat cooling, abandoned for expensive meals with a man who quoted poetry instead of changing oil. His phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. We need to talk. Cafe tomorrow morning? Thomas typed back a single word when the pieces were falling into place, revealing the extensive damage beneath Amanda's polished performance. Soon, very soon, the entire production would reach its final act. And Thomas Wheeler, the quiet mechanic everyone underestimated, would show just how ruthlessly he could dismantle a betrayal. The morning air held the weight of inevitable confrontation as Thomas helped Amanda load her suitcase into her car. 3 days in Boston for a theater conference. The lie rolled smoothly off her tongue, practiced and polished like her stage dialogue. I'll miss you, Amanda said, reaching up to straighten his collar. Her wedding ring caught the light, a prop in an increasingly elaborate performance. Thomas allowed the touch, his face revealing nothing. Drive safely. Weather supposed to be bad near Boston. Always so practical. Amanda's laugh tinkled like broken glass. That's why we work, isn't it? You keep me grounded while I help you soar. Thomas watched her drive away, counting the seconds until her car turned the corner. 37. He'd counted them every morning lately, measuring the eagerness in her departure. Mrs. Henderson was waiting at her kitchen window, watchful as a guardian angel. Thomas retrieved his surveillance equipment from her guest room, where he'd stored it away from Amanda's prying eyes. Remember, the elderly widow cautioned as he checked the cameras. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Are you ready for that truth? Thomas met her concerned gaze. His voice carried the weight of certainty. I've been rebuilding engines since I was 15, Mrs. Henderson. You can't fix something until you know exactly what's broken. Mrs. Henderson moved to her kitchen counter, preparing a pot of chamomile tea, the same blend she'd served him the night his parents died. And what then, Thomas? When you know the full extent of the damage? Then I do what I've always done. Thomas carefully unpacked the surveillance equipment, checking each component. I strip it down to the foundations and rebuild. But this time, I rebuild without the faulty parts. The elderly widow watched him work, her arthritis-curved fingers wrapped around her teacup. She'd known Thomas since he was a teenage boy, showing up in her driveway with a rusty toolbox and determined eyes, offering to fix her ancient Chevrolet when no one else would bother. She'd seen him survive loss before, emerge stronger, more resolute. The guest room is ready, she said finally, pressing her spare key into his calloused palm. I changed the sheets this morning. There's extra towels in the bathroom. Thomas paused in his setup, the keys metal cool against his skin. I won't forget this, Mrs. Henderson. Your kindness. Hush now. She patted his hand gently, her touch carrying decades of maternal wisdom. Sometimes seeing the truth hurts less than wondering, she said softly, understanding filling her aged eyes. The digital display on Thomas's laptop illuminated Mrs. Henderson's guest room with a cold blue glow. The hidden cameras activated precisely 1 hour after he'd pretended to leave for his night shift. Each screen showed a different angle of his home. The kitchen he'd renovated, the living room where he'd built custom shelves for Amanda's theater awards, the entryway where they'd shared countless goodbyes. Mrs. Henderson placed a cup of black coffee beside him. You don't have to watch this, Thomas. The recordings will be enough. I need to see it with my own eyes. His voice carried the same quiet certainty he used when diagnosing engine problems no other mechanic could solve. The BMW's headlights swept across the driveway at 8:47 p.m. Nathan Russell emerged carrying a bottle of wine and takeout bags from Villa Romano, the restaurant where Thomas had proposed to Amanda 4 years ago. The same restaurant where he'd saved for months to afford the ring. The exterior camera caught Nathan's practiced smile as Amanda opened the door, wearing the red dress Thomas had given her for their last anniversary. They embraced with familiar intimacy that twisted something deep in Thomas's chest. Such a gentleman, bringing dinner. Amanda's voice carried clearly through the speakers. Thomas never thinks of romantic gestures like this. That's because dear Thomas probably thinks romance means changing your oil on schedule. Nathan's cultured accent dripped with mockery as he unpacked the food onto the kitchen island Thomas had built last summer. Some men simply lack sophistication. Amanda giggled, already opening the wine. He means well. He's just so limited. All engines and practical things. No poetry in his soul. Unlike some of us. Nathan moved behind her, hands on her waist. Did I tell you about my plans for after the production? I have connections at several prestigious theaters on the coast. With your talent, your vision, but the acting school. Amanda's protest sounded rehearsed, unconvincing. Darling, you're meant for bigger stages than teaching drama to suburban children. Besides, Nathan's smile turned predatory. We can use the money Thomas saved for something far more worthy. A fresh start. Just the two of us. Thomas's fingers tightened on his coffee cup as they continued their intimate dinner, mocking his simple nature between bites of expensive pasta. Every cruel laugh, every dismissive comment about his lack of culture or ambition burned into his memory. The poor man actually believes I'm at a theater conference. Amanda rolled her eyes, pouring more wine. As if I'd waste time on local workshops when you've shown me what real artistry means. Speaking of artistry, Nathan pulled her closer. Let's discuss our private rehearsal schedule. 3 days of uninterrupted character development. Mrs. Henderson touched Thomas's shoulder as the scene grew more intimate. You have enough evidence, dear. Don't torture yourself. But Thomas watched with cold detachment as Amanda and Nathan moved from the kitchen to the living room, their wine glasses abandoned beside the wedding photo they knocked aside. Every betrayal was cataloged, every deceit recorded in high definition. The most damning revelations came between their moments of passion. Amanda shared their private struggles to conceive, blaming Thomas's long work hours rather than her secret birth control pills. He'd found the prescription receipt last week. Nathan bragged about manipulating his ex-wife's alimony payments to fund his artistic lifestyle while targeting wealthy, unsatisfied women. Next month's production will be my grand finale in this backwater town. Nathan stroked Amanda's hair possessively. Afterward, we'll use Thomas's savings for a proper fresh start. The fool's so trusting, he'll never suspect until we're gone. What about the school board? Your contract? Amanda's concern seemed more for his career than their deception. Already lined up a position at a prestigious arts academy upstate. They're quite impressed with my credentials. Nathan's smirk suggested those credentials might not withstand scrutiny. The real question is, are you ready to leave all this provincial life behind? Thomas will be devastated. Amanda's voice held no real remorse. But he'll survive. He always does, fixing cars, rebuilding things. That's all he knows. Then it's settled. After closing night, we disappear. No more pretending to appreciate his simple ways. No more enduring those tedious Sunday dinners with your overwhelming family. Thomas switched off the laptop with deliberate calm. 4 hours of footage provided more than enough evidence of their betrayal. His hands, steady from years of mechanical work, didn't shake as he began saving the recordings to multiple drives. What now? Mrs. Henderson asked softly, collecting the untouched coffee. Now? Thomas's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Now I start taking apart their carefully constructed performance, piece by piece, bolt by bolt, until there's nothing left but the truth. He worked through the night, organizing the footage into clear segments, their mockery, their plans, their betrayal. Each clip was carefully time-stamped and backed up. Years of documenting car repairs had taught him the importance of thorough documentation. Mrs. Henderson watched him work, recognizing the focused determination she'd seen when he'd rebuilt himself after his parents' death. They underestimate you, Thomas. They think because you work with your hands, you're simple. People always do. Thomas's smile held no warmth. They forget that the same hands that fix engines can also take them apart. Completely. Permanently. Dawn crept into the guest room as Thomas finished his preparations. In a few hours, Amanda would return from her fake conference, full of lies about professional development. But the performance was over. The stage was set for the final act. Try to rest, dear. Mrs. Henderson guided him toward the bed. You'll need your strength for what comes next. Thomas lay down fully clothed, mind already mapping out the systematic dismantling of Amanda and Nathan's carefully constructed deception. Like any complex repair job, it would require the right tools, precise timing, and absolute attention to detail. Mrs. Henderson made him chamomile tea, sharing stories about her own husband's infidelity decades ago. Channel your pain into purpose, she advised, passing him the steaming cup. That's how we survive betrayal. He accepted the tea with a nod, already planning his next moves. Amanda and Nathan thought they were the skilled performers, but they'd soon learn that Thomas Wheeler knew how to orchestrate a production of his own, one that would bring down the curtain on their dreams with brutal. The Romano family restaurant hummed with Sunday morning preparations. Maria Romano kneaded dough with practiced movements while her husband Antonio inspected fresh produce deliveries. 40 years of marriage had perfected their synchronized dance through the kitchen. The back door opened at precisely 6 a.m., Thomas's designated arrival time for their weekly cooking lessons. But today his expression stopped Maria's hands mid-knead. Figlio mio, she said softly, using the term of endearment she'd given him years ago. What's wrong? Thomas placed his laptop on the clean steel counter. I need to show you something. Both of you. Antonio recognized the tone, the same controlled voice Thomas had used after identifying his parents' bodies at the accident scene. He quickly flipped the sign to closed and locked the front door. In the office where Antonio handled the restaurant's finances, Thomas connected his laptop to the small TV usually reserved for watching soccer matches. The footage began to play. Their daughter in their son-in-law's house, betraying not just her marriage, but the family values they'd instilled since birth. Maria collapsed into her chair as Amanda's cruel words filled the room. Every dismissive comment about Thomas's simple nature, every joke about his dedication to honest work, felt like a slap to the parents who'd welcomed him as their own. Stop! Antonio's command cut through Amanda's tinkling laughter. His accent, usually subtle from decades in America, thickened with emotion. I have seen enough. Maria clutched her rosary, tears streaming down her face. How could she? We raised her better than this. Family is sacred. Marriage is sacred. La famiglia è tutto, Antonio whispered. Family is everything. The motto carved above their restaurant door, passed down through generations of Romanos, now stood in stark judgment of their youngest daughter. Thomas sat quietly, letting them process the betrayal. He'd learned patience from these people, watching Antonio lovingly restore classic cars, observing Maria perfect recipes through countless small adjustments. The Sunday dinner, Antonio said finally, his voice hard. 2 days from now, the whole family will know. Antonio, Maria began, but her husband cut her off. No, she dishonors not just Thomas, but all of us. The family must know. He turned to Thomas, gripping his shoulder. You are our true son now. She is no longer worthy of the name Romano. Thomas nodded, understanding the weight of Antonio's words. In their culture, family reputation meant everything. Amanda hadn't just betrayed her husband. She betrayed her heritage, her blood. I'll need copies of those theater funding documents, Thomas said quietly. The ones you signed as guarantor. Antonio moved to his filing cabinet without hesitation. As the restaurant's owner, his signature had helped secure loans for Amanda's dream of an acting school. Now those same papers would become weapons in Thomas's arsenal. Maria dried her tears, steel entering her spine. I will call Rosa, begin the arrangements. Sunday dinner will be special. Her smile held generations of Sicilian memory. We know how to handle family betrayal. Let me help you prep, Thomas offered, falling into their familiar routine. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, the practical movements grounded him. Here, among the honest scents of garlic and basil, his plan continued taking shape. "Remember when you taught me to make tiramisu?" he asked Maria, carefully measuring coffee for the dessert Amanda had always begged him to learn. "You said the secret was patience, letting each layer soak up the bitterness before adding the sweet." Maria crossed herself, recognizing the cold purpose in her son-in-law's voice. She'd seen that same expression in old photographs of her grandfather, a man who'd understood that some betrayals required a particular type of justice. Antonio returned with a thick folder of financial documents. "Everything you need, Figlio. Bank statements, loan applications, property liens." His expression hardened. "Make them pay for dishonoring our family." "They will." Thomas's promise carried the weight of absolute certainty. The next morning found Thomas sitting across from Jackie Russell at a quiet coffee shop 3 towns over. Nathan's ex-wife stirred her latte, her kindergarten teacher's patience evident in her measured movements. "I wondered when you'd find me." Jackie's smile held no humor. "Let me guess. Your wife starring in Nathan's latest production?" Thomas placed a USB drive on the table. "Among other things, I'd appreciate your perspective on his previous performances." Jackie inserted the drive in her laptop, watching the footage with clinical detachment. Classic Nathan, the sophisticated artist trapped in provincial surroundings, seducing bored wives with promises of cultural enlightenment. She laughed bitterly. "I was a gallery curator when he found me. Thought I'd found my own cultured prince. Tell me about the pattern." Thomas's voice remained professionally neutral, like discussing a complicated engine repair. "He always targets women with access to money or resources. I had my family's art connections. Before me, it was a banker's wife who funded his independent theater project. Before her, a real estate agent who helped him flip properties." Jackie's fingers traced the coffee cup's rim. "He burns through their assets, then vanishes for a fresh start with a new leading lady. The school board still employs him. For now." Jackie opened a folder on her laptop. "I've kept records, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, emails proving affairs with married women, documentation of his falsified credentials." "Oxford graduate?" "Please. He took one summer workshop there." Thomas absorbed each detail. "Would you be willing to share these records? Officially?" "I've waited 3 years for someone to ask that question." Jackie's smile turned predatory. "The school board should find them particularly interesting, especially the proof that his prestigious teaching experience consists mainly of community theater workshops." Their conversation continued as Thomas built a comprehensive picture of Nathan. Each revelation added another tool to his arsenal. Next stop, Principal Sarah Chen's office. The school administrator's no-nonsense demeanor matched her reputation for protecting her students' interests. "Mr. Wheeler, what brings a mechanic to my office?" Her tone shifted seeing the folder in his hands. "Unless this isn't about car maintenance." "No, ma'am. It's about Nathan Russell's maintenance of certain professional standards." He presented the evidence, documentation of Nathan using school facilities for his affairs, proof of falsified credentials, financial records showing misuse of department funds. The principal's expression hardened with each revelation. "I've dealt with similar situations before," Sarah said quietly. "My daughter, she was hurt by a teacher who took advantage. Contract renewal season starts next week. I understand the board might appreciate this information before making their decision." "Indeed." Sarah's smile was sharp. "We take our educational standards very seriously here." The final visit proved the most challenging. Diane Martin, head of the community theater board, had been Amanda's best friend since college. Her comfortable home displayed photos of their shared productions and girls' nights out. "Thomas? This is unexpected." Diane's surprise seemed genuine as she invited him in. He declined her offer of tea, instead connecting his laptop to her TV. "I need you to watch something, Diane." As Amanda's friend and as board chairman, the color drained from Diane's face as she watched her friend's betrayal unfold in high definition. "Oh God! The funding approval, we just authorized $50,000 for her acting school project. Money that would have been entrusted to someone conspiring to misappropriate it." Thomas's voice remained professionally detached. The board might want to review that decision. I suspected something, Diane admitted, hands twisting in her lap. The late rehearsals, the changed behavior. But I never thought. Now you know. Thomas gathered his evidence. The board meets Thursday? Yes. Yes, we will need to discuss this. Diane's expression hardened, professional responsibility overriding personal loyalty. The theater's reputation. Exactly. Thomas stood to leave. One more thing. I understand the summer production opens soon. Next weekend. Amanda's directorial debut. Perfect timing. Thomas's smile held no warmth. I've always appreciated good theatrical endings. He drove home through familiar streets, each visit adding another piece to his orchestrated revenge. The stage was set, the players in position. Soon, very soon, Amanda and Nathan would learn that their greatest performance would be their last. In Mrs. Henderson's guest room, Thomas reviewed his day's work. Every conversation had been recorded, every document copied and secured. The momentum was building, the machinery of consequences beginning to turn. You've been busy, Mrs. Henderson observed, bringing him fresh coffee. Just making sure everyone has their proper role in the upcoming production. Thomas's voice held the same focus he brought to rebuilding engines. It's all about using the right tools for the job. She studied him with knowing eyes. And the Sunday dinner? That's the preview performance. Thomas checked his watch. 48 hours until curtain call. He spent the night fine-tuning his plan, making sure each revelation would hit with maximum impact. Amanda and Nathan had scripted their betrayal like a cheap melodrama. Thomas would orchestrate its exposure with the precision of a master mechanic, stripping away their pretenses piece by piece until nothing remained but the cold truth they'd tried to hide. Mrs. Henderson found him at dawn, still working, his eyes holding the same determination she'd seen when he'd rebuilt his first engine at 16. Remember, she said softly, revenge is best served. With absolute precision, Thomas finished, closing his laptop. Every component in its proper place, every connection secure, until the entire machine works perfectly. The next act would begin soon. Thomas Wheeler, the simple mechanic they'd underestimated, would show them exactly how ruthlessly he could dismantle their carefully constructed lies. The Romano family's dining room buzzed with the usual Sunday energy. Aunts arranged platters of antipasti, while uncles debated soccer scores. Cousins chased each other through the kitchen, stealing tastes of Maria's signature marinara. The weekly gathering had followed the same pattern for decades. Thomas sat at his usual place beside Antonio, watching the door. The USB drive in his pocket held the weight of destroyed dreams and shattered trust. She's here, Rosa announced from her lookout position. The entire room stilled as Amanda's car pulled into the driveway. Amanda breezed in, designer purse swinging. Her smile faltered slightly seeing Thomas at the table. Sorry I'm late. Production meetings ran over. Nathan had some brilliant ideas for her. Sit. Antonio's command cut through her excuses. The family patriarch's voice carried generations of authority. Amanda's eyes darted around the room, noting the unusual tension. Her teenage nieces, who normally rushed to hear her theatrical stories, turned away. Her Aunt Teresa, who taught her to apply makeup for her first school play, busied herself with table settings. What's going on? Amanda's laugh held a nervous edge. Why is everyone so serious? Thomas stood, movements deliberate as he connected his laptop to the large TV, the same one where they'd watched countless family videos and soccer matches. We're having a special presentation today. Thomas, what are you? Amanda's words died as the footage began playing. The room filled with gasps and muttered prayers as Amanda's betrayal unfolded in high definition. Her mockery of Thomas's simple nature echoed through the speakers. Nathan's smug voice detailed their plans to steal Thomas's savings. Turn it off. Amanda lunged for the laptop, but her Uncle Marco blocked her path. You will watch, Antonio said, each word carved from ice. Every minute, every lie. Maria moved silently through the room, serving each family member except Amanda. Empty plates clattered in front of her daughter, the ultimate maternal rejection in their culture. Mama, please? Amanda's voice cracked. Non sapiu mea figlia, Maria whispered. You're no longer my daughter. Amanda's cousins, who'd been bridesmaids at her wedding, left the table one by one. Her teenage nieces fled upstairs, their idols shattered. Years of family bonds dissolved in minutes of damning footage. The final clip showed Amanda and Nathan planning their escape, mocking the tedious Sunday dinners and overwhelming family gatherings. Amanda's derisive laughter cut deeper than any knife. "I can explain," Amanda began, but Antonio raised his hand. "Spiegare cosa? Explain what?" His accent thickened with rage. "How you betrayed not just your husband, but your family. Your heritage." Rosa stood, hands shaking. "I saw you with him weeks ago. I prayed I was wrong. It's not what you think." Amanda's theatrical training emerged as she forced tears. "Nathan understands me in ways." Understanding? Thomas's voice carried the cold precision of a surgical blade. Like he understood his ex-wife? Or the banker's wife before her? Amanda's face paled. "What are you talking about? Your brilliant director has quite a performance history." Thomas placed Jackie's documentation on the table. "Ask his ex-wife about his pattern of targeting women with access to money. Ask the school board about his falsified credentials." "No. Nathan loves me. We have plans." "Plans funded by my savings?" Thomas's smile held no warmth. "The same savings now frozen in accounts you can't access?" The reality of her situation finally penetrated Amanda's denial. She fumbled for her phone, desperately calling Nathan. The call went straight to voicemail. "Your leading man is currently meeting with the school board," Thomas informed her. "They're very interested in his creative interpretation of his teaching qualifications." Amanda fled the room in tears, her heels clicking against the tiles Maria had laid herself decades ago. The sound of her car peeling away punctuated her exit from the family she'd betrayed. Antonio moved to Thomas's side, gripping his shoulder. "You are our son now. La Famiglia e tutto. And you have proven worthy of that trust." Maria silently collected Amanda's empty plates, her movements heavy with maternal grief. Generations of family photos watched from the walls. Wedding portraits, baptisms, graduations. Amanda's face would soon disappear from these frames, edited out of the family's visual history. Thomas accepted a glass of Antonio's homemade wine, the same vintage they'd shared at his wedding. The sweet liquid now tasted of victory and vindication. The family rallied around him, their loyalty shifting fully to the man who'd honored their values while their blood daughter betrayed them. The Sunday dinner continued, plates passing, conversations resuming. But Amanda's empty chair stood as silent testimony to the price of betrayal in a culture where family meant everything. The high school auditorium hummed with tension as the school board convened their emergency meeting. Nathan Russell sat before them, his usual artistic confidence crumbling under Principal Chen's steely gaze. "Mr. Russell, would you care to explain these discrepancies in your credentials?" She spread Jackie's documentation across the table. "Our investigation shows no record of your claimed Oxford degree. A simple misunderstanding." Nathan's charm faltered against hard evidence. "The summer workshop program also shows no record of your participation." Principal Chen's voice could have frozen fire. "Nor do any of the prestigious institutions listed in your employment history." Board members exchanged glances as Nathan's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Thomas watched from the back row, accompanied by Jackie, whose presence added crushing weight to the evidence. "Furthermore," Principal Chen continued, "we have documentation of unauthorized use of school facilities for personal meetings." The whispers grew as parents in attendance processed the implications. Nathan's private music students' mothers shifted uncomfortably, recalling his special attention to their children. "My contract," Nathan began, "is terminated, effective immediately." The board chairman's verdict carried unanimous support. "The police may have additional questions about your misrepresentation of credentials." Nathan fled the auditorium, his artistic poise abandoned. Outside, local reporters waited, Jackie's strategic press contacts ensuring maximum exposure of his disgrace. The dominoes continued falling throughout the week. The theater board, led by Diane, emergency convened to address Amanda's position. Given recent revelations, Diane announced to the packed meeting room, all funding for the proposed acting school project is revoked. Additionally, Mrs. Wheeler's role as director is terminated. Amanda, sitting alone in the back, watched her dreams implode. Her theater students' parents had already withdrawn their children from the summer production. Years of community goodwill evaporated in days. Thomas channeled his energy into work, taking on complex restoration projects that required absolute focus. The garage became his sanctuary, each repaired engine a small victory against chaos. "Wheeler," Mike Anderson called out one afternoon, "got someone here to see you?" Amanda stood in the doorway, her designer outfit incongruous among the tools and engine parts. "Thomas, please. We need to talk." "No." The single word carried titanium strength. "We don't. The theater board, my students, my family. You've destroyed everything." Thomas wiped his hands on a shop rag. "You destroyed it yourself. I just exposed the truth. I made a mistake. Nathan, he manipulated me. Told me what I wanted to hear. Like he manipulated his ex-wife and the women before her." Thomas's laugh held no humor. "You're not special, Amanda. Just another act in his ongoing performance. What do you want? Money? I'll pay back the savings. I want nothing from you." Thomas turned back to his engine. "The divorce papers are with my lawyer. Your scenes in this production are finished." Amanda's tears fell on concrete that absorbed them without trace. "You're so cold, so calculating. I never thought." "That's right." Thomas met her eyes. "You never thought. About our marriage, our family, our future. You thought I was simple, limited. Now you understand just how wrong you were." She fled the garage just as Nathan had fled the school board, stripped of pretense, exposed in their true nature. Thomas returned to his work, each turn of his wrench another step toward rebuilding his life without their toxic presence. 2 years passed, marked by the steady rhythm of engines repaired and lives rebuilt. Thomas expanded Anderson's auto shop, his reputation for honest work drawing customers from 3 counties. Amanda's fate reached him through Rose's updates. His ex-wife served tables at a highway diner, her stage now reduced to reciting daily specials. Nathan had vanished to another state, leaving behind mounting debts and shattered dreams. Thomas found unexpected friendship with Jackie, Nathan's ex-wife. They connected over shared experiences of betrayal and recovery. "You know what the worst part was?" Jackie said one evening as they organized activities for Mrs. Henderson's senior center. "Not the betrayal itself, but realizing how blind I'd been to the signs." Thomas nodded, understanding completely. They developed an easy companionship, helping others while healing themselves. The auto shop thrived under his ownership. Mike's retirement offer had become reality. Local families trusted him implicitly, knowing his word was unbreakable. The Romano family embraced him more fully than ever. Amanda's photos disappeared from their walls, replaced by images of Thomas at family celebrations. Her empty chair at Sunday dinners became his permanent place. One evening, Thomas found a thick envelope on his doorstep. Inside, a handwritten script detailed Amanda's version of their story, casting herself as the misunderstood artist seeking true love. He carried the pages to Mrs. Henderson's house, where the fireplace waited. The elderly widow watched as he fed the manuscript to the flames. "No regrets?" she asked softly. "None." Thomas watched the pages blacken and curl. "My life isn't a performance anymore." The Romano family hosted a celebration when Thomas paid off his house, the same house he'd once shared with Amanda. Maria cooked for days, while Antonio selected wines from his private cellar. Standing among people who valued truth and loyalty above all, Thomas realized that losing Amanda's dramatic dreams had awakened him to life's authentic joys. Her betrayal had broken him, but like the engines he restored, he'd rebuilt himself, stronger, more resilient, and finally, truly whole. The simple mechanic they'd underestimated had orchestrated a masterpiece of justice. In the end, Thomas Wheeler's honest hands had built something far more valuable than Amanda's theatrical ambitions: a life of genuine connections, unwavering integrity, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving betrayal with your soul intact. Epilogue: 5 years later. The evening rush at Sal's Truck Stop Diner moved with practiced efficiency. Waitresses balanced plates of meatloaf and mugs of bitter coffee, serving tired truckers and local regulars. Among them, Amanda Wheeler, now using her maiden name Romano, though her family no longer acknowledged it, moved mechanically between tables. Her once manicured hands now bore calluses from carrying heavy trays. The designer clothes had been replaced by a polyester uniform that smelled perpetually of grease. 5 years of serving breakfast specials and refilling coffee cups had stripped away her theatrical flourishes. "Order up!" The cook's voice carried none of the poetry she'd once craved. Amanda grabbed plates of eggs and hash browns, remembering elegant dinners with Nathan, their plans for artistic greatness. Nathan Russell's own fall from grace had been spectacular. After fleeing to an upstate arts academy, his pattern of manipulation and fraud had quickly emerged. Former victims came forward, encouraged by Jackie's public exposé. His prestigious teaching career ended in multiple lawsuits and an 18-month sentence for financial fraud. Amanda's last contact with him had been a desperate collect call from prison. He'd asked for money, claiming he'd reimburse her from a non-existent theater grant. She'd hung up, finally understanding Thomas's ruthless dedication to truth. Across town, Anderson's auto shop had expanded into a state-of-the-art facility. Thomas Wheeler's reputation drew customers from 3 states, each seeking his legendary ability to fix the unfixable. "Mr. Wheeler?" A young apprentice mechanic approached his workbench. The restoration project's ready for inspection. Thomas straightened from the vintage Mustang he'd been examining. At 37, his hands remained steady, his eyes sharp. Success had added subtle refinements to his appearance, quality tools, better work clothes, but hadn't changed his fundamental nature. The apprenticeship program had been Jackie's idea. After helping organize activities at Mrs. Henderson's Senior Center, they discussed ways to support troubled youth. Thomas now mentored teenagers from broken homes, teaching them to rebuild engines and lives. "Good work, David." Thomas inspected the restored carburetor, noting the precision in every detail. "Your mother will be proud." David beamed. As Principal Chen's son, he'd chosen auto shop over drama club, a decision that would have seemed impossible in Nathan Russell's era. The high school's priorities had shifted significantly after the scandal. The Romano family restaurant still hosted Sunday dinners, though the faces had changed. Thomas's seat at Antonio's right hand had become permanent. Maria treated him like the son she'd always wanted, teaching him recipes passed down through generations. "You'll take over the restaurant someday," Antonio often declared, watching Thomas perfect his grandmother's tiramisu recipe. A man who understands the value of tradition, of family. Rosa had married a local contractor who shared Thomas's appreciation for honest work. Their young son, named Thomas in his uncle's honor, already showed interest in both cooking and cars. The Romano family photos no longer showed Amanda's face. She tried sending Christmas cards the first few years, but they'd been returned unopened. La Famiglia è tutto, family is everything, meant exile for those who betrayed its trust. Mrs. Henderson, now in her 80s, still lived next door to Thomas. He'd renovated her house completely, adding safety features and modern comforts while preserving its character. She'd become a surrogate grandmother to Rosa's children, teaching them to recognize truth in a world of performances. "You did me a favor, really," Jackie told Thomas during one of their weekly dinners at the Senior Center. They developed a comfortable friendship, understanding each other's scars. "Nathan's betrayal freed me to build something real." She'd transformed her teaching career, developing programs to help students recognize manipulation and emotional abuse. The school board regularly consulted her on hiring decisions, particularly for arts department positions. Thomas's auto shop success had allowed him to create a scholarship fund at the local technical school. Each year, he sponsored students who showed promise in mechanical work, emphasizing the value of practical skills over theatrical ambitions. The community theater had undergone its own transformation. Under Diane's leadership, it focused on youth education and family productions. The acting school dreams that had fueled Amanda's betrayal became reality, but with qualified teachers and strict oversight. One rain-soaked evening, Amanda stood across the street from her parents' restaurant. Through the windows, she watched another Sunday dinner unfold. Thomas carved the roast, her father's traditional role. Her mother's genuine laugh carried faintly through the glass. A new sign hung above the door. Wheeler Romano Family Restaurant, EST 1975. The hyphenated name represented more than business partnership. It symbolized the true marriage of values her parents had always wanted. Inside his workroom, Thomas kept a small box of memories. Among them, the USB drive that had exposed Amanda and Nathan's betrayal. He rarely opened it, but its presence reminded him that some broken things couldn't and shouldn't be repaired. The local paper Society section occasionally mentioned Nathan Russell. His post-prison attempts at artistic resurrection had failed spectacularly. Community theaters checked references more carefully now, particularly after Jackie's advocacy for stronger background checks. Thomas's professional reputation had grown beyond mere mechanical expertise. Local business owners sought his advice on integrity-based leadership. The technical school invited him to speak about building success through honest work. The divorce papers sat in his lawyer's files, a testament to decisive action. Amanda had signed away everything: house, savings, dignity, understanding finally that Thomas's nature extended to revenge as much as repairs. The highway diner where Amanda worked saw a constant stream of travelers, each passing through without noticing the former drama student who'd once dreamed of Broadway lights. Her theatrical training now served only to fake enthusiasm for daily specials. She lived in a small apartment above a convenience store, the rent barely manageable on her waitress salary. The community theater's new productions played without her. Local parents crossed the street when they saw her coming, remembering how she'd planned to steal money meant for their children's education. Nathan's attempts to contact her had grown increasingly desperate before stopping completely. His artistic dreams had dissolved into substitute teaching positions and failed community theater auditions. The sophisticated charm that had once seduced her now read as obvious manipulation. Thomas's house, once the site of their betrayal, had become a different kind of home. The kitchen where Nathan and Amanda had plotted their escape now hosted cooking lessons for Rose's children. The garage where he'd first suspected her infidelity became a training ground for young mechanics. Mrs. Henderson often sat in her garden, watching Thomas teach neighborhood kids about engines. "You've built something better than revenge," she told him. "You've built a legacy." The security cameras that had exposed Amanda's betrayal remained in place, though they now served only to protect Thomas's growing collection of vintage cars. Each restoration project represented another small victory, broken things made whole through patient, honest work. Jackie's influence had spread beyond the local schools. She conducted workshops on recognizing emotional manipulation, using her experience with Nathan to help others avoid similar traps. Thomas occasionally spoke at these sessions, his quiet strength reinforcing the message. The Romano family's influence in the community had only grown stronger. Antonio and Maria's dedication to traditional values attracted people seeking authenticity in an increasingly artificial world. Their Sunday dinners became legendary, but invitations remained earned through trust and loyalty. Amanda's attempts at reconciliation, tearful visits, lengthy letters, even a self-published memoir, met with immovable resistance. Thomas's ruthless efficiency in exposing their betrayal had taught her that true strength often wore coveralls and carried wrench sets. The technical school's graduation ceremonies now featured a Wheeler Excellence Award, given to students who demonstrated exceptional integrity in their work. The irony of his ex-wife serving truck stop coffee while he inspired future generations was never lost on Thomas. Local banks sought his business advice, recognizing that his success came from fundamental principles rather than theatrical presentations. The same hands that had stripped away Amanda and Nathan's deceptions now built foundations for others' achievements. Mrs. Henderson's guest room, where Thomas had monitored the betrayal footage, became a study where he mentored struggling students. The space that had witnessed his pain now fostered others' growth. 5 years after the betrayal, Thomas Wheeler's life stood as testament to the power of ruthless honesty over artful deception. The quiet mechanic who'd been dismissed as simple had orchestrated a masterpiece of justice, proving that true strength lay not in dramatic gestures, but in the patient, precise work of rebuilding what others had destroyed. The Romano family legacy continued through him, not through their biological daughter. The values Amanda had betrayed, loyalty, honesty, family, found their true heir in the man who'd exposed her infidelity. In the end, Thomas's revenge hadn't required ongoing action. Simply exposing the truth, thoroughly, irrevocably, had set consequences in motion that continued to unfold. Amanda and Nathan's theatrical dreams had dissolved into the mundane reality they'd once scorned, while Thomas's simple dedication to honest work had built something far more valuable, a life of genuine purpose, unwavering integrity, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that some performances, once ended, could never be revived. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.